Hi, Amy. Welcome to the Horsewise podcast. Thank you so much for being a guest today. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I had discovered you, and I'm sure many other people already knew about you, but I discovered you through Facebook. You run a really great page, the Amy Skinner Horsemanship page, and I love the mix of things that you have on that page. It speaks to classical dressage, horsemanship, many different things, emotional discipline, physical balance. But I really like the way you put all of that together. It's kind of unique. And then you always have really great sort of illustrations, either through your own videos or through interesting articles you've linked to or through your podcasts.
Oh,
So
thank you.
yeah, I really enjoy it. Plus your tone's really down to earth. Like you seem like a normal, real person. So
I
that's
kind of
also,
am.
yeah, I kind of am when nobody's looking. So I really wanted to have you on the podcast because a lot
Okay.
of times people who work with horses who are good with horsemanship, sometimes they can be a little inaccessible unless you
Yeah.
ride in their clinics or if you know them. So for my listeners who might not have heard of you, I have listeners now in 50 states and 50 countries. Just in case they
Wow.
haven't heard of you, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think is kind of the key things about your work? It could be how you came to this work or the things, your philosophy, whatever you think is most important. And
Well,
also tell us about your dog who's in the car as well.
oh, yeah. Hey, Pearl, come here. Pearl, come on, Pearl. Come here. This is Pearl.
Hi,
Pearl
Pearl.
is my 4-year-old blue heeler. She goes everywhere with me, and she's a little spoiled. So when I left out the door this morning, she jumped in my car, and I was like, well, why not?
Well, and secretly, I wanted to interview Pearl, so we
Yeah.
just kind of
Pearl,
told you so that you would bring her. Yeah.
Pearl she could tell some real secrets about me, and thankfully she won't do that today.
Oh, well, that's good. She signed one of those non-disclosure agreements.
Yes, exactly. So my work has actually changed a lot over the last few years. So I'm still, like, I would say, rebranding it, for lack of a better term. But I started out about 10 years ago doing problem horses, and I thought I was just doing regular horse training.
Mm-hmm.
And all these horses that I was getting were problem horses, but people didn't know it. You know, they would bring me a
Right.
horse to tune up or to work on. And so over the years, I got a lot of practice at working with problem horses. But I
Mm-hmm.
found that the general public didn't have a clue what a problem horse was, what behaviors are neurotic or not healthy. And
Mm-hmm.
people were just sort of hoping for a Band-Aid to be slapped on so they could go back out on the trail or go back to the show. Or, they kind of thought of me as like just come stuff my horse in the trailer and please go away. Like, don't
Yeah.
tell me how to integrate all these things into my life and change my, opinions and change my day-to-day handling and all that stuff. So that's when I really was like, okay, there's a huge need in the horse world to understand the way horses think, to understand the way horses move, to understand how our day-to-day handling affects them. And I got to realizing that so many people don't know what a mentally and physically sound horse looks like, because it's so rare, actually, that
Mm-hmm.
these kind of neurosis is normal, like weaving and wind sucking. And, my horse just does that. He's just like that. He's quirky. He's odd. And I started to realize, like, this is so bizarre that it's really hard to find healthy, happy horses in a natural herd situation. So that's
Mm-hmm.
when I started to really change my focus from being a problem solver to being a more integrative type of work. So now when I take training horses in, it includes body work, it includes lessons for the owner, it includes balancing for the horse. We look at why the horse is behaving that way, and then we go through all of the list of things that might contribute to that behavior, and we fix every one of them. And now the people that I work with are people who are interested and willing to do that.
Right. Right. As opposed to someone who's coming in and saying, fix it all in 30 days. Like
Right.
just
He bucks, so just make him stop bucking
yeah,
so
make
I
it
can
something
ride.
like, yeah, yeah. And then I don't ever want to come back. And I certainly, I
Yeah.
don't want to change. Like, it's not about me. It's about fixing the horse, fix that
Yeah,
horse's
actually,
problem.
the last one I had like that, I got an email and the lady was like, you know, he's bucking and I'm looking for somebody to help me ride the bucks out so I can get on. I really don't want to get hurt. And I thought, well, like, gee, I also
don't want to get hurt. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Well, you think you're paying me to like almost kill myself? It's not my job.
If you could just get him tired so he doesn't buck as hard, that would be great, Amy. That would be perfect.
So I realized like I don't want to get hurt either. And
Yeah.
like I also don't want to buck him out because that's not good for him either.
No, and I think that's a kind of an interesting thing that comes up a lot. So I do two things. I work with a racehorse adoption program called LOPE. And then the second thing I do is Horsewise, the podcast, and I do some horsemanship coaching. But I started working with ex racehorses, 0 qualifications. You could argue still have 0 qualifications. And what people would tell me when these horses would come in is they'd say, oh, you need to ride him down. And I'm like, well, he's a racehorse, so ride him down is like Tuesday to him. Like, yeah, they just get ingrained. It's almost like an OCD behavior. And those are the horses that kind of introduced me to this idea of what's really going on there. Like, what is really going on? And a lot of times it's stuff that needs to be addressed in a slow way before you, and that's something that I really have noticed about your work, is that you're almost always, when you're talking about the horses you're working with or the approach you have, it's getting down to what is the horse doing in the most basic fundamental way, how he carries himself physically, how he is on the end of a halter, lead rope, all these things, that rather than going, well, if we just get him jumping high enough, he'll be fine, kind of thing. We'll just kind of gloss over it. So I just find that really, I think you do that in a really unusual way, in that you break it down. I know most people who work successfully with problem horses almost always have an underlying fundamental philosophy underneath it that gets down to not just putting a Band-Aid on it, but I think you really express it well in how you put it together. That again, that kind of integrative approach that you have.
Well, I think that so much of problem horse training focuses so much on the problem that it almost increases the anxiety for the horse about that problem. And like herd bound behavior is a really good example, because you see, you have a horse who's herd bound and we, you know, take them away from their horse and let them rest and bring them to the horse and just work the tar out of them. And you're going to work. So the horse learns that, like, I'm with my friend, but I'm super anxious and I'm getting worked. And like, the only place I can get relief is over here where I'm really anxious. So I learned that I have to hold still, but I never get calm mentally. So they learn what behaviors will get released and what won't, but they never get more mentally calm about the situation. And if you think about a horse's fundamental needs is to be with the herd, it makes perfect sense for them to be nervous away from their herd. So you add anxiety on top of something they already were anxious about. And it really clicked for me when I worked with a guy who found out that I was introverted, and he was like, oh, we got to fix that. I'm going to take you to parties. I'm going to take you to all these places. You're going to meet all my clients. And he started like setting me up to like be trapped in these situations I wasn't prepared for, where people would bombard me and be like, hey, it's great to meet you. And it made me so much worse. It made me more anxious. And then I got to where every time I'd turn around a corner, I was like, are there going to be people here that I haven't met yet? I finally realized, like, all he's done is make my anxiety about meeting people 100 times worse.
Right. It's almost so like, like you'd almost like get shut down. Like you'd be like, well, if I'm quiet and don't act freaked out, maybe he will stop bringing me to parties.
That's what I learned, is like, I know how to get out of this situation. It's just meet everybody, be quiet, and then figure out how to get out of it. But I never got more comfortable. And then that really clicked for me, that, you know, these horses are learning what behaviors will get a release, but they aren't getting more relaxed.
Right. And what is it that you think, in your experience and again in your philosophy, what is it that helps them truly become more relaxed? What is the combination of factors that you like to look at and help the horse with?
Well, I think I spend a lot of time watching their expression, and there's a lot of cues going on in the face and the body to tell that they're anxious before a behavior has ever popped up. So, you know, what I used to do years back is I would take a horse away from the herd and I would be out in the arena and suddenly they'd have a meltdown, and that would be the time that I would work on it. And now I look at the horse, as soon as I put the halter on and start heading for the gate, there's anxiety already popping up in their face, and they haven't exploded yet, but it's there. And so, you know, now I found that if I address it in the tiny little pieces as it pops up, and a horse's fundamental need, aside from eating and shelter, is to be with a herd, to have security. That's the number one thing that they want in life, is to be secure. So if I take them away from their herd, they're already questioning their security. Am I going to be okay? And it's, we all know from our own experiences, especially during COVID, like all of us are stressed, we're anxious, we're not knowing what the state of the world is. And we found that learning is getting really hard for us. Doing our jobs is really hard for us. But we have a hard time empathizing with the horse. He's just supposed to do it. I pay his board, I feed him, I brush him. Why won't he just work for 1 hour a day? But to him, his whole world is falling apart when we take him out of the pasture. Oops, I'm sorry. I don't know what just happened there. Sorry, I got a phone call. Anyway,
I thought, wow, she's got sponsors in her car. Wow. For our listeners who aren't going to be watching this sort of JPEG image of an ad popped up right over Amy's face. So I guess that was from your phone.
Anyway, so if I make sure the horse understands that I'm not removing security, that they can always come back, I might take them away from the herd, come back, take away from the herd, come back, and I might not leave more than 3 feet from the fence 100,000 times till they finally realize that they're okay. I'm acknowledging their needs. Now we can go to work when their mind is calm. But so much of our training happens when their mind isn't calm, and so they don't retain understanding. They just learn what behaviors are going to get them in trouble and how to not get in trouble. So they're basically being chased by aversive cues all the time.
Yeah, they're not really participating then
exactly
in the task at hand or the activity.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that makes a big difference. Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. And it can be something as simple as, I grew up riding jumpers and dressage horses, and I was, like I have to have the inside rein for bend. If I let it go, they're going to look to the outside. If I don't keep my leg on, they're going to not go, or they're going to go too fast, or, you're constantly chasing these problems. And I could ride very successfully, I would say, but I didn't realize how little I had their mind until I started riding horses who were actually involved in what I was doing. And it was like a dream come true. Like, I don't have to hold this inside rein. I don't have to nag you into going. I don't have to fix all these body parts from head to tail, because the body is going the way that I want them to go. And most people, I think, only experience that when they're on their way back to the barn, where they're like,
they're just like, I'm straight, I'm totally focused, no problems, right. No resistance at all, right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I was working with a client the other day, and I was explaining to her how the difference between being fixed in a silhouette of a position versus actually being relaxed and in the position. And on the example I gave was of a plie for a person. And let's say a person has a little trouble with a plie. They feel like it's they can't quite do it. And I said, I could put you into a stone box so that you would be forced to stand in a plie position. In other words, if you lifted up too much, you would hit your head. If you went down too much, you would scrape your butt on the stone wall. And you would learn to assume a perfect plie position in terms of how it looked as a silhouette, but you would be rigid. You'd be hating every moment of it. You wouldn't truly be able to relax into that posture. And if I were to remove the stone wall just like that and ask you to leap up, you would just fall over because you didn't have any real basis. Whereas if you have a horse or a person who is a little nervous about a plie, you would gradually show them how to assume parts of the posture and then relax out of it, and eventually so that became a more comfortable thing, and then they would seek it out. They would say,
"Oh, great analogy."
And that really kind of was a light bulb moment, because we get fixed on the silhouette, right? Particularly in some show disciplines, right? Judges have to have some standard. So people go, my horse, he has the perfect headset, and the horse is just like holding his breath. Like, I know if I move my head anyway, like I'm going to, so that's kind of the difference between having a horse that's participatory, but also, like you said, with the dressage, when you're holding them into place all the time, they're not really carrying themselves. So they can't develop like the balance. And then, if you're pushed and prodded into a position, it's just not as comfortable for a person either. So it just makes sense.
Well, I regularly get dressage horses in that if you would let go of the reins, they would fall down.
Right.
Because they're using your hand for a crutch, and they don't like it, but they don't know anything else. So if you don't support their head and neck, they actually can't maintain their balance, which is, and not that they were balanced to begin with, but they have come to rely on your hand, which is really sad.
Yeah. And I think you had a really cool, and for my listeners, I will link to this in the show notes so you can see the specific image, but you had linked Amy showing a horse's skeleton with correct bend and with incorrect bend when the rider's relying on the inside rein too much to draw the head around, and the complete difference in those two postures.
Yeah, that's a big one. So I just did a clinic this weekend, and that was really fun because I had a bunch of my riders who were riding horses that, some of them were stiff as a board and some were like a wet noodle. And it was interesting because everyone to turn would have the inside rein, to pull the inside rein to make the horse bend. I'm not talking pulling like they were horrible people ripping their teeth out, but, they pull the inside rein to get the horse to turn, so the horse falls in, so then the inside leg comes in to fix that, and then the horse falls out, so then the outside rein corrects that, and it's like this circle has turned into just a Jenga game where if you pull one more piece out, the horse is going to fall down. And so I worked on having these riders feel the shoulders and feel how when one shoulder gets out of balance, if you fix it with the rein, the horse leans on that rein more, because anytime you add pressure, the horse resists that pressure by going into it until you add another force to push it away. Right. So when both shoulders were going equally forward, suddenly these horses were turning beautifully with a loose inside rein. And the riders are like, wow, I've never felt anything like this. But it's actually really simple. It's just not easy. And the hard part for us is to just let go of the instinct that we have to just make the turn happen.
Right.
And we've all gotten, I think, accustomed to thinking of bend as this excessive head and neck, like it looks prettier when there's a head and neck coming over. Right. And I would say the large majority of horses are overbent most of the time.
And you just posted, I think, was it a Bruce Sandifer with a horse?
Bruce Sandifer. Beautiful horse.
Beautiful horse, and it's a very delicate thing, the bend. It isn't really the nose coming over at all. It's more in the vertical, and you can just see that horse is perfectly aligned. And then, of course, there's no tension in the rein at all, right?
Yeah, it's so beautiful. It's just like the most perfect picture. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll link to that too for my listeners again, because I'm geeking out on all of the photos that Amy's been posting. So they're all like, we can't even see those. This is a podcast. Yeah, I really also what's interesting about, again, this is how I know you, is more through Facebook and the blog post. But what's interesting is how you go back and forth between worlds that people might think are very different. So working with, which you could say are upper level movements, having your horse aligned perfectly so that they can do upper level dressage movements without tension, and also addressing the horse that's pushy on the ground, a completely different type of quote problem or challenge to work with in people's minds. But the way that you present it, it's very related. And there's something again about how you bring together these two worlds, I think, in a way that is very instructive, but also, again, maybe shifts people's perspective a little bit.
Yeah, it's all related to the horse. I mean, I can't, within a few seconds of going to teach a new student, the way that the horse even approaches me tells me a lot about how this horse is going to operate under saddle, and the way that the student is sitting there telling me, what they do, what they work on, who they are. I already have a pretty good idea of how this horse is going to move and how this horse is going to feel to that rider, because I would say a large number of, I would say in the English discipline, those horses beeline it over to me and stick their nose right in my face and start to just kind of, like, where's my cookies? Who are you? Pet me,
Right,
and it's, right. They think it's, so cute, and he just loves scratches. And that horse, not only is he very pushy on the ground, but his shoulders are locked, his front feet are drilled into the ground. He has pulled through the rider's rein to come over to me. And so those two things are very connected. That horse is always pushing through barriers. He doesn't know where the center is. So it's not that he's being poorly behaved. It's that horse's life does not have a fixed center for him to find and be in. So he moves around all over the place because there's no structure. And so whenever he runs into something, he's pulled through the reins to come over to me. Eventually the rider's like pulling him back, and that horse just doesn't know where center is. So why would a leg or a rein mean get centered?
Right.
And that's so common. The horses like that, I get training horses at my place that they'll break down fences for that same reason, because their whole world has turned into something for them to push on. They get beat up by other horses because they push on other horses. They just don't know how to relate with their whole life.
Right. It's like they push into pressure automatically, and it's not because, again, like they're quote problem horses. It's just that there hasn't been that understanding of boundary. You can't have a place of peace if you don't have a boundary.
Yes.
A center, by definition, is in the
Has a
center
boundary.
of something. Yeah, it's in the center of something. It isn't just random center in swirling around in the cosmos. And structure, I know some riders can feel like structure is either they'll interpret it as being very rigid. Again, like we have to be in a frame at all times. The horse doesn't have the ability to be expressive in movement because I have to control every element of that.
Right.
Or they have the opposite where they feel like it's almost like cruel to set a boundary. Like, you know, my horse and I have this kismet relationship.
Right.
And, you know, we don't even need to have a plan. We just kind of zen out together. And meantime, the horse is pretty much doing whatever it wants. And through no fault of its own. I mean, I would be the same way, don't get me wrong. And just to make it clear, like my background is, you know, extreme amateur. It's not like I came to this through any kind of, you know, traditional background. I mean, I know you've been riding since you were like 5 years old or something and kind of came through, you know, as a professional. So whenever I talk about these things, I've made all of those mistakes like a bazillion times. And
so have I.
You know, I'm sure I made them more spectacularly than you did. I was very committed to those mistakes for a long time. And but what I like is if you can get people to just sort of see, again, that shift in perspective, like even on the ground or when you're leading your horse. Like my whole thing is that I can usually tell a lot about the relationship between you and your horse just by the way you lead that horse, how you catch the horse, lead it. And that basic fundamental thing is actually the basis of everything. Like for the most, we're talking about kind of the kindergarten elements, but the kindergarten elements are underneath the more advanced things too. And so that's just something that, you know, I get a little fixated on.
Yeah, that's been huge for me because my favorite teachers, you know, I would say my mentors and role models are the softest people that I know and the kindest people that I know, but they are able to be that way because they have the best boundary keeping of any people I've ever met. And that's been fascinating to me over the years as I've studied with them is, you know, they're so kind and they're so soft. And so I tried to emulate them and I realized that I was getting pushed around by clients and friends and people left and right. And I was like, I think I went a little too far this way, you know? And so then I have to study with them longer. I've seen them put some pretty firm boundaries on students and, you know, clients and people that kind of came in a little fiery, I would say. And they were able to be so kind, I think, because they have very good boundary keeping abilities. And that's been like this, my goal over the last few years is find that balance between softness and, you know, firmness and being able to be soft with people and horses. I think lies in between those two things is, you know, you can be kind and have boundaries because people who don't have good boundaries end up getting resentful and have to make these huge corrections. And you have to fight with your horse because you didn't give them information to know what to do. So they've done the wrong thing, but they didn't know what they were expected to do. Now they're in trouble.
Right. And it's been a little unfair because you've let the horse drift into behaviors that weren't ideal. And then what tends to happen, and again, I put myself in this category, I've done this a lot, particularly back in the day, is then you overcorrect.
Yes.
So you've let your horse drag you, or your horse is starting to drag, he's pushing ahead with the lead rope, pushing ahead. And then finally, when he's like 4 feet past you, then you get upset and you yank on him and whack him. And he's like, wait, that was great for the last 40 steps. Like, why are you ambushing me? And so that ends up creating a scenario where whenever you're not really redirecting your horse, you're punishing your horse. You don't mean to be doing this. It's not like people going around trying to be mean, but that's basically the scenario that sets up, and then you can't be soft. You can't be soft.
Yeah, to me, for good riding and good horsemanship is 100% about taking initiative to guide the horse. And you know, everyone wants to have this partnership and we want to be a horse's friend, but you can't get along with your horse if you're not providing good. I mean, there's two classes of people. There's the people who want to just constantly nag their horse half to death, and there's the people who are like, best friends, and that's great. Both that's great, but those you have to have some idea of what you expect the horse to do and how to give that to the horse. You're basically taking responsibility for how they move and where they go, and a plan for them. Otherwise, they have to figure out what else they can do. Something that I usually do with my students is I put them on the end of the lead rope and I have them close their eyes, and I do groundwork with them the way they do it with their horse.
Oh,
And what usually ends
cool.
up happening is they have this like super loosey-goosey lead rope with no feel it in at all because they want to be soft. So this is flap, that they can't feel. So they close their eyes and I ask them to go with their loose lead line the way that they do, and they don't feel it. So then I hit them with the flag. And then they jump forward, and then they can't find the lead rope, so they like wallow around. And then they come in close to me, so then they run into my flag. And so it turns into this constant nagging for me where I keep having to flag them away from me because they won't get off of me. And they open their eyes, and they're like, I didn't know what you wanted.
Like, well, you're like, hello.
Now go apologize to your horse and try it again. Because
that's so funny. That's a great exercise. I really like that.
And I found that people are not nearly as tolerant of the mistakes they make when I do that to them that they expect the horse to be.
Like that, yeah, they resent you. They're like, hey, I'm not.
How could you be so mean to me?
Right. It's just confusion is like the hardest thing for a horse. Like it's sort of like you want to set it up so the horse learns to search, but if the answer is never right, or or it's really erratic or inconsistent, then they just stop searching, or and that can take various forms depending on the horse's personality and background. And so I think it's really interesting too. Like I'll sometimes I do very basic kind of things like with halter and lead rope. And I'll be working with someone, let's say whose horse is a little younger or a little bit distracted. And we'll be talking, and the person's talking to me about their day or whatever, or what's been going on with the horse. And the horse's eyes are all over the place. And I'll be like, oh, jiggle lead rope, or look over here, or do this, or kind of get her with you. And sometimes the people get frustrated. They're like, well, I can't talk to you. I have to be staring at her all the time. And I'm like, pretty much. Like it's kind of like eventually it gets easier, but depending on your horse, like, I've worked with some horses that are really distracted, and it really is like, I'm leading that horse up the driveway, and I'm not talking to anyone. People are saying hi, and I'm like, I'll just kind of point at the horse, like I can't even, because this particular horse needs that focus all the time. And once you get used to doing that, it gets a lot easier. But that awareness is sometimes, I think, hard to for people to come to without a lot of kind of coaching or example. And I feel like that's a big thing, is awareness that people miss. Like you say, like the horse's expressions, where the horse who's herd bound, and you're working on that when you halter them. You haven't even left the pasture yet, but you're working on what's coming up in their expressions. Whereas a lot of people don't notice that until they're on the horse and there's a problem, even though it's been building up slowly. So
I think awareness is, one of the biggest things that I focus on for riders. Is it's not something that we typically think about in our day-to-day lives. We drive to and from work, and we kind of zonk out for the drive because I do this every day. We're not habituated to being aware, most of us. And with horses, being aware is absolutely essential to guiding them in the first place. Because if you are aware, you can see what needs to be done and do it before there are problems. So that's what I feel like most of my job is to head off problems and create an environment where those problems aren't something the horse feels that they need to do anyway. And then when I have my training horses going pretty well and my students come out to ride them, they're not habituated to being aware, and so those problems come right back up. I have 4 horses of my own who are they were given to me because they were problem horses that just weren't going to work out in the situation that they were in. And they do really well with me, and they're pretty well adjusted now, but I know that in the event that they were rehomed, if they were rehomed, those problems would come right back very quickly. If you don't see a problem coming up and you continue doing what you're doing, those horses they know how to explode. Those behaviors are very ingrained throughout their life, and they know exactly how to get out of situations through panic and big scary behaviors, because that's what they learned in their younger lives. It's better if you don't teach horses that in the first place, which is why being aware is so important.
It is, and I think too, in kind of the modern era or whatever, there's rarely a lot of consequence for a person for being unaware most of the time, just in their
Oh
day-to-day
yeah,
life.
go to the
You know,
grocery store,
I
you find
know.
people standing in the middle of the aisle, not looking at their phone, blocking the doorways. I mean, it's like everywhere. Unawareness is just normal. So when I have
Right.
people come for a lesson and I'm like, okay, you have to be aware. One of my students put it in the funniest way ever. She said, it feels like crying in my head. Like, yeah, it's really, really hard, but it does get normal.
Yeah, I think too, the pre-pandemic and all that, just like normal grocery shopping, because now everyone's kind of, masked up and whatever. But before COVID hit, I had this whole thing about grocery shopping. It's not my favorite thing anyway, but I go into grocery shop, I have a plan, I'm going to go grocery shop. And I was amazed at people's lack of spatial awareness. Like that has
Oh,
gotten
yeah.
definitely worse in like the last, maybe let's say 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And people are just so kind of in their phone or whatever. And people would literally like walk right into me. Like
Yeah.
not, they weren't being rude or deliberately hostile, but they had no spatial awareness. Like, and I'm
Yeah.
like, and I'm right there. And I was like, wow, I'm so glad that you guys don't have horses because you would be really difficult like to work with. But it's not like because people are jerks or whatever. It's like we all get
No,
used
they just aren't
to,
aware.
they just aren't aware. And
And I
so,
teach clinics with 10, 12 people, and they're running into each other's horses, running into the wall. And it's not because they are unable to control their horse, it's because they aren't habituated to looking around. And so now they're in a space where it's full of other horses and full of other distractions, and they're still looking down at the horse's neck. And the horse is going over to the horse in front of them. They don't notice. And, it's kind of a mess sometimes, which is one of the reasons I'm kind of getting out of doing group clinics, because I think it's just much more effective to have one-on-one situations. But yeah, lack of awareness, I think, is so normal that we don't even see it as a problem.
Right, right. And I think an element that horses bring, and maybe more people can become aware of this in a different way, is that they require focus. So, and they kind of require that you come into their world if you want to be successful with them. So one of my hopes is that, as things have kind of changed or what's kind of going on with the pandemic or whatever, that one of the big benefits comes that people come to appreciate horsemanship more, or just are drawn to that more. Certainly it's much more soothing, I feel like, to actually get to know your horse and understand body language. It's actually a good antidote to tension and anxiety, which seems to be a big part of everybody's life right now.
Yeah.
And then the fact that horse shows are not necessarily as active as they used to be, depending on what part of the country you're in or the type of show. So I'm hoping there's an opportunity for people to see that this is not just about also touchy-feely Disney good vibes. It's like, hey, this is really practical for performance.
Yeah.
If your horse is balanced physically and mentally, if you're aware of these small things that you can adjust, or you can kind of do less sooner, you're going to have so much better performance. It's going to be so much more fun for the both of you as a team.
Yeah, and safer. I mean, it's
totally,
just so much safer. I haven't had an injury, knock on wood, in a while, but the last injury I had was 100% horse expression the whole time. Said, I'm not okay. Kept going. Next thing you know, I'm like doing this little thing in the air and thinking all the way down, like, that wasn't a good idea. There were many warning signs. And I used to train very differently than I do now, where it was more about fixing behaviors than I think the systemic approach of why is this horse feeling the need to behave this way. I'm much safer now. I don't feel, knock on wood, stuff happens, but I don't feel that danger is part of my job anymore. And I still take on very dangerous horses regularly. Every day I work with problem behavior horses that are very dangerous, or, I'm about to put this horse down if you can't figure this out, kind of a horse. And I don't feel unsafe most of the time, because I just take things much differently than I used to.
And in those cases, what is like the first thing that you do, like as to assess the horse? Are you looking at braces in the horse, physical braces? Are you looking more at?
You mean when they first come to my place? Or?
Yeah. Just what are the first things you kind of look at?
Pretty much the way that the horse holds his body is a really good immediate indicator of, horse. They'll have like their skin will be really tight over their body or their eye just looks really sunken and kind of worried, and their ears will be tight or their lip will be tight. You know, they have like, uh, my horses that I have now, I remember first seeing them and thinking that's not a very pretty horse. And then when they relaxed, I was like, wow, that horse is gorgeous. And it didn't change anything except it relaxed.
Yeah.
And they'll move tightly. They just will generally have kind of a pinchy look, and they don't thrive. You know, they'll either be overweight or underweight, and their feet have problems. They just, that's a pretty good indicator in the way that they hold their body. And then the other thing is how they get along with the horses around them and the space that they're in. That tells me a lot about what that horse's needs are and how I can help them. I just had a horse go home who could not get along with any horse. He grew up in a solitary, I think in a stall by himself, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he never went out in a herd. He was a late gelded stallion, so he was gelded when he was purchased. But this horse was very quiet and sold as a bomb-proof horse, but he had this very pinched face all the time. And so they would ride him, and he never did anything explosive, but they just felt like there's not a lot there. Like, it worries me that I don't feel like you're there. Right. So I took him home, and he could not go out with other horses without, I mean, he had attacked one of the horses at their place so bad that both horses had to be pried apart and get the vet out, and there was blood everywhere. I mean, he was so aggressive with other horses. And when I worked him off of my horse, this poor horse was trembling. I mean, he didn't know what to do with himself around other horses. And so as I worked with him and got him feeling relaxed with just me, then I got him relaxed. I worked him off of my horse because I did the groundwork that I would do off of her. So it was like, hey, here's another horse. Here am I. We're both here for you. And then I would have him integrate with a herd and do, you know, round penning with other horses and him in the same spot. So they were all working together. And then slowly he actually did go out with a herd, and he was peaceful. And this poor horse was so much more relaxed. By the time I sent him home, he's out with a herd still. I'm doing great.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it's really exciting. But that horse was so anxious. And so he looked safe and he looked still, but he was checked out mentally. So that when he did come out, it was explosive.
I always find it unnerving when I can't tell what's going on with the horse when I'm on their back. So
it's so creepy.
It's so creepy. I mean, you could argue that I go too much the other way because I've worked with. It's not that I'm some like brilliant. It's not that at all. But I was not qualified to work with these ex-race horses, but the charity was small. We didn't have any money. They weren't going to get adopted, so I would kind of climb up on top of them and hope for the best, right? But you know, you always, most of the time, you get a lot of feedback with horses off the track. They're like, I don't feel good about this, or I'm feeling really racist about that. So it's like, sometimes it's way too much information. Like, could you please be a little bit repressed emotionally? Right. But at least you know where they're at. But I've ridden some kind of, you know, again, bomb-proof, one of my least favorite terms, horses, ranchy type horses. And I've been like, I feel like I have no idea what's going on in there.
Oh,
and
that's scary.
And I find that scary because I need to know, I also want to know that you're actually like paying attention to your feet. Like, are you actually here? Like, in case I miss something in the terrain or whatever, I'd like to know that you're looking out for yourself.
Well, I think those are some of the most dangerous horses.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article about it, and I think it's in my book too, about bomb-proof horses and how when they do come to, it's generally not good. And it's kind of hard to predict. It can be really unsafe, and they don't know where their feet are. They don't know about their environment. And I think it's becoming more and more common with these, you know, clinics becoming more popular, which is a good thing, but also a bad thing, because you have all these bomb-proofing clinics and obstacle clinics, and everyone's got to get, you know, the flag the horse so the horse doesn't react. Everybody wants this horse who doesn't react to anything, this dead broke horse. So everyone's goal is to just take all response out of the horse, so the horse just stands there while I crack a whip off his back and the tractor goes around. And to most people, they look at that and they're like, wow, that horse is something amazing. And what I see is a very shut down, unhappy horse that I wouldn't put one leg over, let alone two, for all the money in the world. Give me a spicy, snorty Arab all day long. They know like, what we're doing.
Exactly. They're so honest too. They're like, I am hysterical right now, and I want to share this with you, and you're going to be part of it. It's like, okay, I know where you're at. I appreciate that. You know?
They understand and are aware of their environment and
their
feet, you know, and that to me is why would you want to sit on a horse who didn't know where their feet were or understand their environment? And I don't know about you, but I've been on actual trail rides where there are animals, where you can hear cougars or bears or see. Like one time I had a badger pop out of the grass at my horse, and I was like, let's get out of here! Run! Sometimes you need their flight instinct.
Exactly.
I mean, it could very well save your life. So if you spend all your time kicking that out of the horse, there's going to be some detrimental effects at undoing their instinct.
Yeah, and then they often, if they get, maybe I see this more in some certain kinds of performance horses, where the discipline is requiring a very calm exterior, a very set exterior. They want a certain headset. And most of their higher performance work is done in the show pen. And then, you know, maybe down the road, they get purchased as a step-up horse or whatever, and they get into a different environment. And then those horses just kind of fall apart.
Yeah.
They are so used to sort of being under the surface at all times. You know, and no one's trying to be cruel. It's just kind of been that what's sort of been their life, the way they understand it. It's the stone plie box, you know. So and then they don't really learn coping skills then, because you don't want them to be sensitive. You don't want them to respond. You don't want them to learn that if something's scary that they need to look the person up. You just want them to be
little drones.
Yes, exactly. And then something comes up, as it will, and then the horses have no ability to think through it. And that's when you get things that are scary with a horse that's so scared all of a sudden. Or sometimes they get really resentful, and the horse you think is dead broke and so quiet and bomb-proof, that horse actually has been behind the aids his whole life, and then someone finally really asks him to go, and he's like, I don't think so. And he comes up with a kind of a resentment that you had no idea was there. So those horses. Yeah,
they're just being held together through routine, and they don't actually, I would say they actually don't understand very much at all. They just know day in, day out, keep your head down, do this thing.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So I work with sometimes two horses that raced a long time. We call them war horses. So they're still at the track at 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. And then when they come off the track, there's usually less of a market for them, right? They're a little older and they have sports injuries. And they're really interesting horses. They tend to have kind of big personalities to run that long. And some of them are shut down, but in a very different way. Like they'll just be like very stoic. But if you're able to introduce them to some of these principles of groundwork, or this idea that your jaw can actually move, which is something that a lot
fascinating.
Of them they're like, get out of town. Like,
really?
I didn't know that. That's crazy talk, lady.
That's poor things.
Yes, I know. But they'll be so soft when they recognize that. Like, it's just really interesting. Like, they might never be, they're definitely not going to be like bridle horses or anything like that.
Right.
But they provide so much information. And so it's a really interesting mix to me of a horse whose job was to be a racehorse, which is kind of more related to what they do naturally, which is to run, and as you know, just animals of nature. And then yet they got kind of habituated to just running. So they're kind of shut down and they're kind of not. And so it's just interesting. And you really get to see how those braces come into play as well. So
that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, we say you can't ruin them. That's why we have them. So like so our interns, we have interns who want to be veterinarians, or they want to be horse trainers, or many of them want to be horsemen. And these horses are great because you learn so much from them in ways that are kind of unexpected. And
that's one thing I've been very lucky in myself, is that I've been working with horses who are so problematic that I have so much room to experiment, because I'm like, I can't make it any worse, you know?
Yeah. That's a great thing. It's so cool you're doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of fun for me.
Yeah. So
it was kind of unintentional. I thought I was going to be a normal horse trainer, and it turned out that doesn't exist. at least not. I mean, I guess I could have, but that means you have to kick out. I get a lot of my work actually from other horse trainers who are like, hey, I have this training horse who does this scary thing. I'm not dealing with it. You fix it. And so I realized that even in the horse training world, in the professional world, there's a huge lack of understanding of horses' needs, horses' behavior, horses, of course he's going to be a little kooky if he's in a stall 23 hours a day, and, you might want to turn him out.
Right.
Help a little.
Right. I've worked with, a few years ago, there was a horse that I had through the charity that was going in with a dressage trainer, and nice trainer, good person, very
Mm-hmm.
meticulous. And it was basically a trial situation. And
Mm-hmm.
I went out to watch them work with the horse. And he was a big horse. He was super sweet. He was not what I would say Harvard material. I mean, he wasn't a dumb horse, but he was one of those horses who was very, I need just the facts. Like he didn't
Yeah.
want to, he wasn't like a chess player, you know, so he's
Right.
very like this. And a little bit pushy because he was fairly large and he'd been home raised. His breeders were really nice, responsible people. When he was done racing, they wanted him to have a good spot. But you know,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't horsemen. They hand fed him and all that. And so he was just kind of like,
Right.
you know. And so the dressage trainer loved his movement, and so wanted to kind of see how he'd do in her program. And so it was a trial situation. And I went out to watch, and she was going to put side reins on for the first time. And which is not maybe one of my favorite things, but you know, when you are a charity and you're adopting out horses, you know, you want to have,
Right.
you know, people need to do what they need to do. So this is a fairly tall horse, and she put those reins on. They were very, very tight ones. And that horse got this look on his face that, I mean, it was just, even through his less than, again, he had a very kind of placid face. And I was like, you need to take those off right now. He's going to flip. He's going to flip.
Right.
And she's like, no, this is just how they look. Like, I've had a lot of experience with this. And I'm like, technically, I still own this horse. Get those things off before I come in there with a knife. Like, I was just like, because I'm like a really nice person. Like, I'm very like, oh yeah. And I was like, they're coming off one way or the other. Like,
they all look like they're about to flip over. This is normal.
This is normal. And I'm like, yeah, we don't do it that way. Like, that's just not going to work, you know? And one of the trainer's fears was that she was like, well, I can't believe you free lunge these horses in a round pen. Like, that's so dangerous. And I'm like,
right.
You know, to me, and I'm like, I don't know, they haven't usually reared and flipped on me. So, but it was not to make fun of that person. Like, that was, she is an incredible rider and a really, really good person. So it's really, I'm not, and I have no standing. I could never bring a horse to Grand Prix or anything like that. You know, I couldn't even ride a Grand Prix horse. But that was so clear to me. It was like this horse was screaming. And then she's like, oh no, it's just how they look. And I'm like, no. So those disconnects sometimes in between a professional trainer who is totally more well qualified than me, absolutely, in terms of skill, in terms of accomplishment. I mean, absolutely understand that. But then there's this idea of not getting that basic thing and just not even seeing it. And then they go, all of a sudden that horse just reared and flipped and broke its back. And it's like, oh yeah, oh my God, no, it's not how it happened.
So many of those accomplishments have no value to the horse. Like, it's great that you have your like bronze, silver, and gold medal, but you know, if you can't tell that a horse is going to flip over, that is an accomplishment of no value. And I almost always actually, I wear my t-shirt, my baseball cap, my jeans, my Ariat boots, and I go to teach everywhere in that same clothing, no matter where I'm going. And I almost do it as like a little bit of a, you know, whether I'm going into a barn with a chandelier or somebody's down the road backyard, you know, pasture, I'm not changing my clothes. And I notice the way that people look at me when I come into their chandelier barn, and they're like, who are you to tell me, you know? And I'm like, well, I'm the one who can help you with your horse. And by the end of the lesson, sometimes people are like, well, where did you learn? You know, this is very fascinating, but who taught you? And I know that that's their way of saying, like, who are you?
Right.
Why are you?
What European trainer have you been with that you're just
you
like
don't have an
downplaying?
accent.
Yeah.
You don't have any medals. You're not wearing boots that I recognize the brand of, you know, who are you? And I do that. You know, I like to wear those, like I don't like to dress up. I don't like wearing breeches. I'll wear them for shows, but they're not comfortable. But I almost on purpose maintain the same jeans and a t-shirt attire no matter where I go, because I think that people need to look past the accomplishments and the medals and the like who you think you are facade. And I want them to focus on the horse and the changes in the horse and the actual content of the lesson, because I've noticed that people are so willing to ride with someone with a good name and a good appearance. and they don't notice that what happened in the lesson actually was detrimental to their horse, because they get so excited about, like, I rode with so-and-so, and, you know, lesson was $300 for 45 minutes, and, you know, oh, but now my horse is rearing, but it was a great lesson.
It was a great lesson. I took a lot of selfies, and I mean, my Instagram feed blew up with those photos, so it was
Or the
great.
like $300 lesson where they're like, inside leg, outside rein, get him on the bit, more leg.
Right, more
that
leg.
was $300. I could have recorded that and just put it on the fence for you.
Oh, that's so funny. I was at a clinic once just auditing, and it was a very famous person in a specific discipline. And of course, just what you're talking about, like, people were flocking. They were so excited to be doing individual lessons with this trainer. Mm-hmm. And I had heard of this trainer too. And, you know, I was curious and everything. And, you know, the trainer thought their adulation was pretty merited. He felt pretty good about himself. And he was talking about, there was this horse, nervous horse, really beautiful big horse next to him. And the horse was super tight. Like, you could see his mouth was super tight, and he was really anxious. And but he wasn't like doing anything on the surface that was a misbehavior. He just maybe was having a little trouble having more extended gaits in this particular mm-hmm. clinic. And so the instructor had, the teacher had the student come up to him with the horse, and he's showing them what to do.
Sorry, another phone call.
You just had another phone call. And the horse is just like starting to relax a little bit, but not really. And then the clinician reaches over and he does the whole, pets the horse on the neck, slaps him really hard. Yeah. And he's like, that horse, he wants to be in my presence, and that's why he relaxed right then. And I'm on the sidelines going, that didn't happen. Like, there was no relaxation there.
Yeah.
But it was just like, and of course the student was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I brought my horse. And nothing against, like, but I was like, for all of the expertise and the incredible credentialing, and again, in a discipline I could never even be baseline, you know, successful in, zero feel. Like, there was just zero feel. And I was just like, wow, it's just amazing. Like, it's just an interesting thing to me, because like I said, I really came to this in a very small way, a very basic way. I always feel like I'm barely on a kindergarten level. And then I see something like that, and I'm always like, what is wrong with the world? Like, I should not be the one noticing that, you know? So.
It always cracks me up when you go to these dressage clinics and they have the list of who's riding and what level they're at, because everyone wants to be like, well, I'm fourth.
Yes.
You know, they always have to put the level next to the person's name so people will come out and watch. And it's like, you know, somebody's schooling pre-St. George, and then 3 people come out to help hold the horse while they get on, because the horse is like a firecracker and can't hold still. And then they're like, okay, now to practice the canter pirouette. And it's like oh. You could practice your horse standing still at the mounting block.
Right. It's actually going to help the canter pirouette ultimately, you know. So, yeah, I had a friend who, you know, she was at a barn, and again, good trainer and everything, successful trainer, also dressage trainer. And there was a horse in training, brilliant horse, you know, incredible, but you could never really get him safely from the trailer to the actual warm-up ring without a huge amount of like entourage, because the horse would basically be hysterical. You know, you would get him off the trailer, get him into the warm-up ring, hysterical, but he performed great in the ring.
Right.
It was like, they're like, that's just his process. He's just a diva. And I'm like, he's just, the horse is troubled. I mean, like, what is going on? And I'm like, what do I know? I'm just going to, you know, totally not Grand Prix over here. So I'm just going to sit here in my jeans and, you know, smile a lot.
Kind of nutty, I know.
Yeah. So you, just to, because we're kind of, actually, we've almost been an hour. I don't know if.
Oh, wow.
I know. That just happened too. I had Kathleen Beckham on the other day. We just did an interview too. It's the same kind of thing where it's just like we're talking so easily. But I would think that some of the people who are listening in would like to hear just a little bit too about some of the teachers you've had, just because I started out talking about how, you know, classical dressage and also horsemanship, problem horses, and then also, you know, fundamentals, things like that. So do you mind talking about that a little bit? It's also because I'm curious. I don't know all of your background.
Well, I started out riding, you know, hunter jumper as a kid, and then I did a little barrel racing, which I really suck at, and I wasn't good at either jumping or barrel racing, actually. But I started riding with Buck, I would say, in 2013, 2014. I rode with him for a few years. And then after that, I discovered Brent Graff. And to me, that was like, wow, this is so much softer and so much more considerate and so for the horse in every way. And Brent is not only a beautiful horseman, but just a stellar human being in general. So I've been riding with him ever since. And I've ridden with Mark Rashid, and I really like him. But I would say my main teacher now, I live about an hour away from her and I get out to her as often as I can, is Teresa Doherty.
Oh,
and
wow.
she studied in Germany with Egon von Neindorf and Walter Zettel for 20 years, I think.
Wow.
And she is just also a stellar human being. Not only is she incredible and possesses this information that, you just don't find that often. Your average dressage lesson is like push, pull, kick, spur, restrain. And she's so the opposite, but she'll teach me a lesson in her sweatpants with her little sun hat on, and you would never know this. I think she's 70. I mean, and she'll ride any horse I bring. If I'm like, can you get on and show me what you mean? She'll just pop on. Yeah. But you would never know, because of how humble and how easygoing and how sweet and lovely she is, that she has this experience with these incredible, masterful riders. And she is a masterful rider herself. And that's why I'm so attracted to people who not only are good with horses, but who are just good people.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of my pet peeves, if people are like, well, he's kind of rough around the edges, but he's a really good horseman. Right. And to me, you can't really be both. I just don't think you can, because the people who are mean to other people, that's in them and that comes out, and the horse feels and knows that. And you can have good timing and you can have excellent technical abilities, but that's in you and it comes out in everything you do. And so I have the mentors that I have now and the teachers that I ride with and that I want to emulate are people who are the same person with other people as they are with horses.
Yeah.
They have good boundaries. They have people sometimes at clinics can be a little ridiculous. So they are willing to set boundaries, but they are kind and they're there for horse and human. That's really important to me.
Yeah, that makes sense, because that's that old saying, how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yes, so, absolutely.
And so this idea of integrity across the board, and it's a hard standard to maintain. There's so much emotional discipline that goes into being a good horseman.
Gosh, it's so hard.
It's so hard. And then to be a good person too, like both of those are linked.
Yeah. And I've been around Brent enough to see that who he is always who he is. And that to me is so miraculous that I can't manage it. Sometimes I slip up and I get mad or have bad days, or I get, to where I don't have good boundaries or have too much boundary. I haven't figured out how to be a perfect person all the time yet. But I've been around a lot of horse people to see them say one thing and do another, when nobody of import is around watching, or they can't catch the horse, or they can't get the horse in the trailer. Who they really are comes out at those moments. And I've just seen enough of it to start to make the connection between how they treat people and how they behave behind the scenes, that the people that I am riding with now, I would do anything to be half the people that they are.
Yeah. Yeah, that means you have the best teachers. And
they're great. Yeah, I'm so lucky.
Yeah. I just have enjoyed this interview so much, Amy. And
good. I'm glad. Me too.
I'd love to do it again with you. Maybe we could do a shorter one on a specific topic or something like that. But
sure.
I feel like we barely got started, and that's how it always is with the really great horsemen and horsewomen out there. Is that
thank you.
I feel like oh, we just had 20 minutes. I look up, it's over an hour. So
yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And,
you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I look forward to just following your adventures more and then getting to know you some more with later podcast interviews.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Great. You're welcome.